In the early spring of the 36 BC year, having finally made the determination to invade Parthia and reclaim the military standards that had been lost during the Battle of Carrhae 17 years earlier, Marcus Antonius dispatched one of his generals, a man named Publius Canidius Crassus, into Iberia, modern-day Georgia. There, Canidius Crassus secured the passageway through Armenia by precluding the Parthians' ability to leverage an existing war between two kings within the Caucasus Mountains to Rome's detriment. Using his legions, Canidius Crassus forced Iberia's king Pharnabazes into a peace alliance with Albania's king Zoba before returning to Marcus Antonius that summer. In addition to arranging for the peace negotiations between Pharnabazes and Zoba, Marcus Antonius had also secured the east by placing his ally Polemo on the throne of Pontus and by installing Amyntas on Galatia's throne. In Cappadocia, Antonius appointed Archelaus Sisinnes, the son of his former mistress, Glaphyra, to the throne. And in Judea, Marcus Antonius supported Herod's claim to the throne, a choice which was contrary to the wishes of his current mistress, Egypt's queen Cleopatra VII. In 40 BC, when Parthia's prince Pacorus invaded Roman Syria alongside Labienus Parthicus, Herod had been forced to flee Judea as he was replaced by Antigonus Mattathias, a pro-Parthian member of the Hasmonean dynasty, which viewed Herod, who was Idumean, as both an outsider and a puppet of Rome. Antigonus was the son of Aristobulus, the high priest whose 63 BC war against Pompeius Magnus had caused the Roman general to support his brother Hyrcanus as Judea's high priest. To make certain that his uncle Hyrcanus no longer met the physical requirements for the office of high priest according to Levitican law, Antigonus used his teeth to rip the ears from his uncle's head before sending him off to Babylon as a prisoner. After Prince Pacorus was killed at the Battle of Gindaris, Herod laid siege to Jerusalem with the support of Rome, and by the end of 37 BC, aided by the reduced harvest associated with Judea's sabbatical year, Herod successfully took Jerusalem. With the full support of Marcus Antonius, Antigonus Mattathias was executed, making an end of Hasmonean rule. Although the mutilation of his ears disqualified him from resuming service as high priest, Hyrcanus was invited by Herod to return to Judea in 36 BC. The former priest was accorded much honor and respect by Herod, who sought a connection with the royal Hasmoneans and achieved it through his marriage to Miriamne, the granddaughter of Hyrcanus. Herod then appointed a non-Hasmonean man of priestly descent as high priest. But Miriamne's mother, Alexandra, was a close friend of Egypt's queen Cleopatra. Miriamne begged Cleopatra to intercede on her behalf, influencing Marcus Antonius to support removal of Herod's choice of high priest in favor of her son, Aristobulus, a boy barely 18 years of age. Herod gave in. He removed his newly appointed high priest from office and granted the position to his wife's younger brother. However, less than a year later, the young Aristobulus mysteriously drowned while bathing in Jericho. Believing Herod responsible for her son's death, Alexandra again turned to her friend Cleopatra for help in meting out vengeance. When Cleopatra went to Marcus Antonius in Syria, just prior to his 36 BC invasion of Parthia, the queen pressured the Roman general into punishing Herod for the murder of the young boy. Marcus Antonius acquiesced and summoned Herod in order to give him the opportunity to make his defense. Before leaving Judea, Herod placed his wife, Miriamne, in the care of his uncle, Joseph, with strict instructions that should he be executed by Marcus Antonius, Joseph was to immediately slay Miriamne. But Marcus Antonius released Herod after their meeting, discerning that a client king like Herod was far more valuable to Rome than were the Hasmoneans. At this same time, possibly to appease the wrath of his slighted lover, Marcus Antonius granted Cleopatra several kingdoms which had formerly belonged to Ptolemaic Egypt. In addition to Cyrene, Crete, and parts of Cilicia, Antonius gave Cleopatra control over stretches of the Levantine coast, which included the bitumen fields of Jericho. A highly profitable export for Judea, bitumen was used by Egypt for mummification purposes. Cleopatra now took control of the bitumen monopolies, which she then leased back to Herod. Besides gifting lands to Cleopatra, which technically belonged to Rome even though they were a part of his eastern domain, Marcus Antonius also publicly acknowledged his twin children by Cleopatra for the first time, giving them the cognomens Helios and Selene, meaning sun and moon. Before marching for Parthia, Marcus Antonius sent Cleopatra back to Egypt to await his victorious return. But Cleopatra did not immediately return to Egypt. She instead journeyed to Judea, where she stayed for a time at the court of Herod and Mary. We know little about this visit, except that Cleopatra and Herod apparently used it to size up one another, both hiding behind the smoke screen of etiquette to gain an understanding of their opponent. It is suggested by Josephus that Cleopatra attempted to seduce Herod in jealous retaliation for Antonius's marriage to Octavia Thyreina. But we are also informed that Herod, seeking to align himself with Mosaic law, rebuffed her advances, adopting the moral code of the Judean Jews in his quest for their support. Toward late summer of 36 BC, Marcus Antonius set out for Armenia with between 77,000 and 84,000 troops. Having learned from the mistakes of Marcus Licinius Crassus, who had refused the invitation of Armenia's king Artavasdes to invade through his kingdom, Marcus Antonius marched through Armenia's mountains, where the Parthian cataphracts would be useless in an attack. Committing approximately 6,000 of his own cataphracts to the cause, King Artavasdes marched alongside Antonius, headed for the city of Phraates in Media Atropatene. Though technically an independent kingdom, it acted in concert with Greater Parthia and followed the dictates of Parthia's king. Marcus Antonius hoped that by separating Media Atropatene from Greater Parthia, he would weaken Parthia's new king, Phraates, who had only recently come to the throne. Following the death of his son, Prince Pacorus, at the hands of Publius Ventidius, Parthia's aged king Orodes had fallen into a deep depression, rendering himself unawares and vulnerable. Phraates, the calculating younger brother of Prince Pacorus, then murdered their father and proclaimed himself king of Parthia. But Marcus Antonius meant to immediately strip him of one of his Median allies. Because the enforced peace treaty between kings Pharnabazes and Zoba had taken most of the spring, Marcus Antonius felt the pressure of lost time inside the military campaign season. Rather than winter in Antioch and attack Parthia in the spring, Antonius pushed his men hard to reach Media Atropatene, aiming to complete the campaign and return to Cleopatra in Alexandria before the winter snows fell. As he made haste to reach the city of Phraates, Antonius allowed the baggage train of 300 wagons carrying food, grains, and siege equipment to fall behind, assuming it would catch up to him at their destination. However, as Antonius reached Phraates, the Parthians attacked, not targeting his men surrounding the city, but the 300 wagons still making their way through Armenia's mountains. Killing every Roman to a man, the Parthians stole all the food Antonius required to feed his legions and all the building materials necessary for constructing siege towers and walls. With the Romans now trapped outside the high walls of Phraates and unable to breach the city's defences, the Parthian cavalry, with their ability to swing around while astride a charging horse and fire what is known as the Parthian shot, conducted hit-and-run attacks against the Romans for weeks. Realizing that the baggage train would not be coming, Marcus Antonius was face to face with the absolute necessity of taking the city of Phraates, which was well stocked for winter, and offered the only hope of saving his forces from starvation. However, he faced continual attacks as the Parthian cavalry picked off his men one by one. Concluding that Marcus Antonius faced certain defeat at the hands of the Parthians, King Artavasdes of Armenia withdrew his 6,000 cataphracts and abandoned Antonius at Phraates. When the winds began to chill, Antonius, who had lost approximately 20,000 men and 4,000 cavalry to the continued onslaught of Parthian shots, finally followed suit and also made the decision to abandon Phraates. Enduring non-stop guerrilla attacks from Parthia's cavalry, Marcus Antonius led what remained of his weakened forces back towards the mountains of Armenia. By the time his men reached the safety of the mountains, the snows had fallen. Antonius's men, dressed in their usual military garb and hobnailed sandals, were not appropriately attired for the long trek through the snow necessary to reach the safety of Roman Syria. Another 8,000 men dropped, not only from starvation, but from exposure to the elements, as frostbite and gangrene caused the loss of fingers, toes, ears, and noses. When Marcus Antonius finally arrived in Roman Syria, his surviving army, approximately 50% smaller than the army he had marched into Parthia, was emaciated, missing body parts, and bound in rags shored up by the extra clothing they had taken from their fallen comrades. After 5 long years of preparing for his conquest of Parthia, then putting his trust in the hallowed plans laid out by Julius Caesar to enter Parthia through Armenia, Marcus Antonius returned a defeated and broken man, with the deaths of thousands of men on his conscience. He had failed to follow the most critical precondition in the plan of action set forth by Julius Caesar, which was to enter Parthia, but engage the enemy only enough to decipher their capabilities and weaknesses, and avoid rushing headlong into a battle which might see another disaster like that of Carrhae. Yet Marcus Antonius had not paused to analyze the enemy, nor had he taken care not to leave his food supplies behind, but had hurried straight away to a well-fortified town, where he immediately found himself surrounded and trapped. From Antioch, Marcus Antonius wrote to Cleopatra in Alexandria, urging her to send help. He next wrote to the Senate, formally announcing his first victory in the Parthian campaign, though he also made it clear to the Senate that the war was not yet concluded. In his missive to Rome, Antonius pressured his brother-in-law, Caesar, for the 20,000 soldiers which had been promised in exchange for the 120 warships Antonius had provided so that Caesar might defeat Sextus Pompeius. From Caesar, Antonius received excuses. Sextus Pompeius may have been defeated, but the promised soldiers were just not ready for transport. In his reply, Caesar included his continued promise to send the legions, as soon as their training was complete. Several weeks later, the Queen of Egypt arrived in Antioch at the head of a large caravan that was loaded down with warm clothing, food and wine, medicines and medical supplies, fresh arms and armor, as well as a host of Alexandrian physicians, all in her attempt to offer succor to Antonius's devastated legions. As for Marcus Antonius, we are told he isolated himself from his men, spending an inordinate amount of time sitting along the shore and staring out to sea. As he drank himself into a stupor, Antonius did his best to try and figure out just exactly what had gone wrong.